I'm Nate, and welcome back to another episode of the Redeemed Man podcast. We've been hearing for several different couples in our relationship series, and we have taken some time to hear from some of our military couples. And today I'm delighted to have with us Russ and Cindy Leaphart. Russ had been in the service for 30 years. He is out now and retired. And so welcome to the show, guys.
We're happy to be here. Thank you.
Well, we're going to start with some either or questions, which I always think is fun with couples. So when I ask you this, if you'll just both try to answer around the same time, it's always fun to see how much couples are aligned or how little they're aligned in their likes. Mountains or beach?
Mountains.
Mountains.
Fast food or health food?
Fast food.
Fast food.
Early morning or late night?
Early morning.
Late night.
Night out or night at home?
Ooh.
Night at home.
I would say out.
Affection or words of affirmation?
Affection.
Words of affirmation.
Burgers or tacos?
Burgers.
Burgers.
Cold weather or warm weather?
Warm weather.
Cold.
By plane or by car?
By car.
Yeah, by car.
Love it. It's so much fun. It's just always fun to watch couples interact. And the thing is you can be so diverse, but you really just learn to love each other in those uniquenesses over the years and learn how to meet those needs. Liz and I are, I'm a night person. I would rather stay up late. She's a morning person. I think the Army so ingrains it in you guys that you just can't help it but get up early. And I'm like, on Friday night at 10 o'clock, I'm like, these are the best hours. And she is usually already asleep. So I have
Cindy does her best baking after midnight.
I understand. So I have to know, everybody's always curious, how did you guys meet? Where did the Leaphart love story begin?
I'll let you tell.
Okay. I had just come back from Desert Storm and was on leave for the first 3 weeks after we got home. I was on my way back to Fort Campbell at the end of that leave period, and I was driving through Knoxville. My best friend and my roommate from college had a brother and sister that lived in Knoxville, and whenever I would drive through, I would stop and visit with them. And I stopped and I called Emmett, his big brother, and Emmett wasn't there, but his sister Stella was. And so I stopped to see Stella, and she said, "Hey, I'm going out to dinner with a bunch of friends. You can go with me, or we can just hang out here." And I said, "No, let's go out with your friends." So we went to this place called the Copper Cellar in downtown Knoxville. It's not there anymore. And Cindy was one of Stella's friends. And I went back about a month later and hung out with her a good bit more. And a month after that is when I asked her to marry me. And 6 months after that, we were married.
Awesome. And so you were already in the service at that time?
Yes. Yeah, I was a captain. Like I said, just come back from Desert Storm.
So Cindy, you knew a little bit, I guess, about what you were getting into, but probably not completely.
No. I knew nothing. In fact, even over Christmas, I joked with my mom. She said, military families are weird. So my dad had been in the Air Force for just an enlistment time. And so she just said, "Oh, they're just an odd bunch." But you know, my brother ended up enlisting in the Air Force too. So she really didn't get away from it. And she's proud of us.
Well, that's awesome. So you're originally from Tennessee?
Well, I was born in Pennsylvania. We moved to Tennessee when I was a child, and but I did most of my growing up there.
Okay. And Russ, how about yourself?
I'm an Army brat. My parents are both originally from South Carolina, but Dad went into the Army after he graduated from Clemson, and he retired from the Army a year before I came on active duty. So I tell people that until I retired from the Army, there was never a time in my life when the Army didn't tell me where I had to live and when I had to be there.
So you guys, I know with 30 years in the military, have been in a lot of different locations. So I have to know of your time in the service, where has been your favorite duty station along the way?
Well, probably Germany and but then stateside Fort Mamas.
Yeah, yeah. If you I probably shouldn't say this, but if you got to live in New Jersey, Fort Monmouth is the place to do it. Because it's right off the Jersey Shore, and because you're living on post, the cost of living is very affordable, which it's not for a lot of people that live up there. But it's a beautiful part of New Jersey as well. But I would agree with Cindy. I think my favorite place we've ever been is Germany. Had the opportunity to be stationed there twice. My first assignment, I was in Schweinfurt. This was before the wall came down, so we were getting ready to go to war against the Warsaw Pact. And then the second time, the wall had come down by then, and I was married by then, so Cindy came with me, and that was just a really, really special time as well. So I enjoyed both of those tours immensely.
Germany's beautiful. Food's delicious.
Mhm.
Just great.
Yes.
Yes, yes.
Oh, Liz and I actually met for the first time, landed at the Frankfurt airport. This is the first time we met in person. And we got our kind of first date was at the Christmas markets, which is just about as special as
Oh,
you can get. So
Absolutely, absolutely.
completely understand that. With moving, I know in the Army, you often have the Army move for you. So can you share one of the craziest experiences in a move where maybe your stuff was not there for a while, or no telling, because I know there's crazy stories.
On that move to Germany, the Army, I'll say they misplaced our household goods for about 6 months. And so we got moved into a set of quarters right after Cindy showed up. But our stuff, and it wasn't lost, they just lost the paperwork and weren't sure whose pile of stuff that was over in the corner of the warehouse. So when we finally tracked down the paperwork and they realized that was ours. So we were about 6 months of, sleeping on a mattress on the floor and things like that. So it was that was an interesting time from a household goods perspective. That's probably the worst move that we made. We had one where, because I was making a transition in my career from being a signal officer to being an acquisition officer, and a bunch of schools that I had to go to en route, we were basically homeless for close to a year. We came back from Germany and made that transition, and I had like 4 different schools I had to go to en route to my first assignment. And so, yeah, we talked about that year as the year we were homeless. And what we didn't realize was the impact it was having on our kids, who years later were trying to figure out, why were we homeless for a year? We were still in the Army. Why didn't we have a place to live? Well, we did. We just, it wasn't permanent just yet. So, anyways.
So you have 2 kids. How was it helping them with those transitions and the moves? How, Cindy, how did you set them up for that success? And because it's a lot for kids to and sometimes can be very challenging on depending on the age and the season of life, to move to a different school, a new place.
That is probably the most difficult part. I think for us and for our family was the moving. Because there was a period of time where we moved every summer, 4 summers in a row, and some of those we knew ahead of time, so it was expected. But it's hard to explain that to a 4-year-old, and kids, they are adaptable and things like that, but it is still hard. So as much as we could keep the same, we did. If there was an opportunity like, oh, let's buy new sheets for your bed in your new room, we would do that, to try to make it as fun as we could. We always, one of the first things we did was find a church home and to be plugged into that. And I believe that was helpful for our kids and for us as a family and as a couple. We also tried to find what was unique and fun about where we were. And so our kids were able to kind of, embrace that, whether it was, some piece of history that was unique about where we were, or a museum, or, even food, just things like that. So those were some of the things we did. But, honestly, there were some nights where there were tears and I don't want to be here. I want to go home. And home was where we last were. And by the time you got used to where you were, it was time to go again. And so there were times where it was difficult, but we got through it and the Lord helped us definitely.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
Have you guys always had in your marriage faith as the kind of guiding post and the root that kind of is always the firm foundation, or has that been something that through the years you really go, hey, this is something that and you really implemented that?
I think Cindy was much closer to that than I was when we first got married. I mean, I became a Christian when I was about 5 or 6 years old, and Cindy grew up in church and had been a Christian for years and years as well. But her faith, I think, was much more real to her at that particular moment in time than mine was. And it was meeting Cindy and realizing how important her faith was to her that in many ways motivated me to take my faith more seriously and to get closer to Christ and to really try to live in His path for us. And so from that time on, early in our marriage, that became one of the guiding principles of how we did things and why we did things and how we made decisions.
Awesome. Well, I know you guys probably met a lot of different couples over the years, but are there some couples that you think back over that you remember and you go, man, they really made an impact in our marriage, and we really were informed by the way they lived their life and the model their marriage?
um, yes. I think of the Townsleys. And while we didn't go to church with them, and this was in Germany, so it was very early on in our marriage, um, they went to a different chapel than we did, so we weren't in church together. But we knew, they were Christians, and just watching them and how they lived their lives and how she did the army wife things and how she just presented herself and reached out to the other ladies in our community and how Colonel Townsley was such a mentor to Russ. I mean, professionally and just, as a man, I think, and even trials that they had in their family and how they handled those, was, we got to kind of watch them, work through that. So that's the first couple that comes to mind.
Yeah, that's the same couple I was thinking of. Was T and Carolyn, and I was working for Colonel Townsley. I was a young captain up there on the staff of his signal command, and T was my boss. And when I was going to be the secretary of the general staff, and when I got selected to go do that job, I got told, "Hey, listen, you don't want to go work for T. Townsley because he's heard about you and he doesn't like you." and I thought, what am I getting into? The guy turned out to be like my biggest champion ever, right? So, and Carolyn was one of those ladies in the community that was active in investing in the younger wives and helping them understand what this Army thing is all about. And she invested heavily in Cindy. And that's a relationship that we've maintained over the years. Every year, I still go up to AUSA in DC every October for my company that I work for now, and T makes a point of coming by and hanging out with me for a couple hours, and so we catch up at least once a year, and we've stayed in close touch with the family since then. And so it's they've influenced us and mentored us a lot in professionally, personally, spiritually, and how they center their family life around their relationship with Christ and their involvement in their church. And so it's been a great relationship and mentorship in a lot of different ways.
But also, I would say your parents too.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So, I mean, just the conversations that I had with your mother, about moving, about church, just handling life, and seeing, how they because Russ's dad was in the Army for
Yeah,
24
years.
years, and just all the things that they went through, and kind of learning from them, what to do and not do,
Yeah.
and so I would think of them as well.
Yeah, no, that's great. My dad was always, I mean, one of the reasons I went in the Army was because I wanted to be like my dad, and so that his example for me, both as an officer and as a husband and a father and a good Christian man, was fundamental for me as well. Yeah, so I think I realized that you kind of felt that same way about mom and the way she felt about things.
We talked about a lot of things, and I mean, she would say, "You don't have to go to that coffee if you don't want to. You don't have to sign up for every bake sale,
Mom was always a rebel.
She was.
So it's very funny. I have some not my dad. My grandfather was National Guard. I have some family in the National Guard, and the county that I grew up in, Alabama, is known as the volunteer county because we had the most number of volunteers based on our population. And so I have always been around it, but I would say not as close or as familiar as I was when I got married to Liz. And it was funny because obviously me not being military as a husband was super unusual. And I remember when she came to Fort Benning, now Fort Moore, and command in an infantry unit, it was really funny because I got all kinds of invitations to the teas, and I was like, "Babe, I think I should show up to one of these."
Should have.
That would have been great.
It really is cool though to see how spouses really take on and care for other spouses in the unit.
Yes.
And Cindy, I'm sure you had many opportunities to love on and help encourage wives in different places and spaces, and that really is it's a family thing, and that's what I tell people all the time. If you've never been around somebody and never fully experienced military service, you have to understand it is encompassing every part of somebody's life. It's not just the job they show up to. It is every aspect, and everybody's got to be bought into what's happening. And so it takes sacrifice on all parts. And there's great joys too. The new location. Sometimes it's good to move from one city to the next.
It is.
I used to always tell Cindy when she'd get frustrated with stuff wherever we were, and I'd say, "Listen, you know this is not going to last any longer than about 2 years, 3 at the most. So you can stand on your head and hold your breath for that amount of time. It'll be over soon."
Liz would say, she'd be like, "This is more challenging environment." And I'm like, "Well, and she's like, but it'll change soon." And I'm like, "Isn't that hard though, to know your boss is going to change soon and you don't know what the other one's going to be like?" She's like, "It's always an adjustment."
Yeah.
So you guys, over your time, 32 years of marriage, what have been some of the most challenging seasons? And again, share what you're comfortable with, but I would love to know, like, what have you walked through that you're like, wow, this is really putting some strain on our marriage? And because I know, and most of our audience, I think, understands that marriage is beautiful, but it's work.
Mm-hmm. I think back to a particular moment when I made the transition to being an acquisition officer, and in that world you don't deploy as much, but you're probably gone more often because of the TDY that's involved. And so my first real assignment there, we were at Fort Monmouth, New Jersey. We were there for 3 years. I spent more than 2 of those years physically on the ground at Fort Hood. And that was a hard time adjusting to that pace and that op tempo and that amount of time away from home. And I think that no, I don't think, I know that I was not keeping my focus and attention on the things that I needed to keep my focus and attention on. And I let the job, and listen, we were doing incredibly important work down there at Fort Hood and digitizing the Army, but I let that become the all-consuming thing that just occupied my entire time and attention. And Cindy pointed out to me very clearly one time how poor a job I was doing at being a good husband and a good father, that really got my attention and helped me begin to reorient, right? And so that was a difficult time. And I didn't even realize how difficult it had become, right? I was so consumed with what I was doing and the importance of it that I totally missed the signs and the cues along the way. And Cindy, very lovingly but very pointedly, let me know how I was missing the mark. And I think that's been one of the things that has always been difficult for me. It's easy for me to get consumed by the work. And the good news is that God placed me with this lady who will very lovingly but very pointedly let me know when that becomes the case, and lets me know when I need to adjust. And because of the trust and faith that I put into her, when she lets me know that, I realize that it's time to make an adjustment.
Cindy?
Well, and I think that, well, the second time we were at Fort Monmouth, I guess that was, um, well, I hate to say it was a trying time in our marriage, but it was just a difficult time in our family.
Mm-hmm.
Because you were gone so much, and when you were gone far away.
Yeah.
Because that was after the terrorist attacks and things like that. And so again, while he wasn't deployed for months or a year, he was gone for 2 or 3 weeks at a time, then be home for 2 or 3 weeks, and then gone again. And so I don't want to say kind of cut him out of our life. I had our calendar. This is what you're doing and we're doing. And so when you're here, you just have to kind of jump on board or not. So Russ is a really good ironer. I'm not. And so when he was home on Sunday mornings, that was his job, to iron our clothes that we needed for Sunday morning. And it was, you put your clothes on the ironing board and Russ will iron them. And so one Sunday, I forgot he was there. Really? I did put my clothes out there, and then I was getting ready, and then I ironed my own clothes. And he said, I was going to do that for you. I said, well, you were here, and then there were times where, he would tell our kids what to do or what they couldn't do. And I would think, no, they can do that. It's okay. You don't get a say because you haven't been here. And so those were difficult times, I think, to work out. Mm-hmm. And but we got through them.
We did.
We did.
It's very interesting with the couples that I've listened to, and we've talked. Almost every single one of the husbands shares exactly what you do, Russ, about pouring themselves too much into their work. And I think that's a constant battle for men in general, but I think in the military world where, it is so performance oriented and really your job is extremely crucial to something happening that you're going to be judged by, and that you've got your peers watching your moves. And if something falls short, it has huge consequences. And so I definitely see that in every couple that I've talked to, that's something that they face. Another thing that I think that's a common theme is communication, and being intentional about that. What are some things that you guys learned along the way that allowed you to make sure you were on the same page, or communication practices where there's certain time you learned how to prioritize? Because it's so crucial, and being aligned, like you shared, Cindy, it can be hard when somebody comes back in the home and they haven't been there. So it takes talking that out and communicating about it.
Yeah, I would tell you, if out of all the things that we probably need to continue to work on and improve on, that might be the biggest one, right? I would argue that even after 32 years, we're still not as good at communicating with each other as we should be. Just on simple things like keeping track of each other's schedule and knowing where each other is and what they have planned, where, I might show up and say, hey, Cindy, we're going to go. And no, we're not, because I've already scheduled this. Yeah. And so we still have a lot of room for growth in that area, to be sure. But I think that what helps us deal with that is that each of us has learned to be pretty flexible with the other. Certainly has learned Cindy has certainly learned to be very flexible with me, but I think we've learned a good deal of flexibility and adaptability with each other to understand that what's it graciousness, yes, graciousness, because you know. Uh, I know there are things that Cindy does that are incredibly important to her, just like she knows there are things that I do that are incredibly important to me. And even if I have to adapt my schedule, I want to make sure that she's able to do those things that are important to her. She leads a women's Bible study on Tuesday mornings in the spring and in the fall, and so I'm willing to do whatever I have to do to rearrange my schedule to make sure that there's no impact to her ability to do that, and the Sunday school class she teaches and the GAs that she leads and those things like that. I want to make sure that she's always got whatever she needs from a time perspective, from a resource perspective, to be able to do that. And so if I have to adapt and be flexible in order for that to happen, I'm willing to do that. And Cindy, knowing, like, when I went back to school now over right at 5 years ago, Cindy knew what a time commitment that was going to be. And while I don't always share with her up front, hey, I got a paper that's due next Tuesday, or I got a midterm that I got to take by Friday. When I say, hey, I got to go hole up in my office upstairs and do this work, she's very flexible and very adaptable and adjusts accordingly and make sure that I'm able to do those things. And so I think that's really the key to so much of what we deal with from a communication standpoint, is just understanding each other's priorities and making sure that we're flexible and adaptable and adjust to each other's priorities.
Yeah, completely understand. Cindy, as you think about Russ, what is the thing that you admire the most about your husband?
Pressure.
No pressure in that. That the things that are important to him and the things that your faith and but even your time in the Army, but our commitment to the things that we are committed to, that you stand strongly on those things, and it's kind of, I don't want to say kind of, but in an unwavering waverly kind of way. That may be the right word. I'm doing a terrible job of I'm sorry.
No, that's great.
In my head.
Sharing about his commitment, like I can see that in hearing about Russ and his life and time in the military, his commitment to finishing school and so many things, even the commitment to your family and listening to you when you
Right.
correct and
Yeah.
he goes, yes, I am out of line. I need to get back in line. Russ, what about
Go ahead.
Russ? What about you?
Cindy's heart has always blown me away. She has this amazing heart and love for people that she has for her family, that she has for our family, that she's shown over and over again for the family that I grew up in, my mom and dad and my sisters, her friends, people that she cares for. Cindy is an ardent champion for all of them, and she has a heart for loving God that is just, I mean, puts me to shame, right? I mean, her commitment and her devotion to serving our Savior is a great example for me. And as I told you up front, I said, when we got married, I wasn't at that place, and it was because Cindy agreed to marry me that I realized I had to step up my game, right? And so she's always been a great example for me in that regard. And so her heart and the openness of her heart and her willingness to love people is something that sets a huge example for me.
Well said, and very beautiful. Both of you guys sharing your love for each other, and that's really what we want people to see. Like, life has its challenges that come at us, but if you stick it out and you keep working at your marriage. There's so much fruit to bear. And thank you guys for the testimony that you live. Russ, I have to know, you shared about school, and how did it come about, this new calling in your life? So you
Oh,
finished the
wow.
Army, you go into the defense contractor world, and now God's called you to pastoral ministry. I have to hear about it.
Yeah, so when I started as a defense contractor, and in the first 4 years after I left the Army, I'd worked for 4 different companies and just was having a hard time getting settled or feeling settled, and certainly struggling to find the same sense of purpose that I had in the Army. And what I tell people is you got to be old to get this, but life in the Army was much more less filling than it was taste great. So life after the Army, yeah. Anyways, so I was really struggling, and I finally realized that finding that sense of purpose was not going to come through the job, but the job was going to give me the maneuver space to go do whatever it was that was going to provide that sense of purpose. And through several things that happened in our lives, it became pretty obvious that that God wanted to take us in a different direction. And at first, I wasn't really sure what that direction was. I had always wanted to go back to school and get a PhD, and with the idea of maybe teaching somewhere. And so like I said, through a series of events, I decided to pursue that. I was talking to the folks out here on the Arsenal from Florida Institute of Technology about their doctorate of business administration. I came home one day and told Cindy, I said, hey, I'm going to go talk to these guys about this doctorate degree. And she said, that is not what you want to do. And I said, really? And she goes, no, you will not have any fun doing that. And if you're going to spend that much money and that much time, go do something that you're going to enjoy. And one thing led to another, and the next thing I know, I'm doing this Master's of Divinity, which wasn't a PhD. But if you're going to go do a PhD in anything theology, they want you to have a Master's in theology first, right? So here I am doing the MDiv, and I thought again that it was going to lead to a PhD and to teaching somewhere. And as I went through this process, God really began to burden my heart for the health of the evangelical Protestant church in America, and what I think, how poor a job it does in engaging on so many of the hot button topics of our day and age. And so how do you speak into the church in order to address some of those things? I thought as a professor somewhere, that would be a way to do that, to pour into young pastors. And what I heard God telling me more and more was that if you want to speak into the church, you need to speak into a church every Sunday, which is pastoral ministry. And so probably about 2 years ago, we finally realized that that's where God was leading us, and committed our lives to that. And so, like I said, this summer I'll finish up, and I'm going to start flooding the Southern Baptist Convention with resumes. So we'll see where all that leads. We will remain Alabama Baptists, but if God takes us somewhere else, it's one more move.
Well, I know there's plenty of Alabama Baptist churches that could use a phenomenal family like you guys. So we'll be praying for you as you finish seminary and find that church to serve in. You guys are going to do a phenomenal job in just modeling, and as you shared, Cindy, hearing about your love for people, and Russ, your I'm sure love for knowledge and teaching, and so it's going to be an amazing journey. And I just thank you guys for your faithfulness. Thank you for your service to our country. Thank you for what you sacrificed as a family, but then thank you for what you're sacrificing for the kingdom, and how you're loving people well and serving. We are so honored to have you on the show today. Thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it so much. We wish the best for you guys. God bless.
Thanks, Nate. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
We are with another military couple as we continue our discussion around relationships and hearing about the challenges that military couples face, and then the great reward that they have as well in serving our nation. But today we have with us Jim and Tabitha Pooler. Welcome to the show.
Hey, Nate. Thanks for having us.
Thanks.
Jim and
Happy
Tab
to
are
be here.
great friends of ours. My wife and I have been able to get to know them through going to church with them, and we have vacationed together, and just an absolute blessing to us. And so, look forward for them sharing their stories so that you can get to know them and hear their insights. But we're going to start out with some either or questions, and Tabitha and Jim, if y'all would answer them at the same time, so we see if you guys are in agreement on these. So, first one: early morning or late night? Mountains or beach? Fast food or health food?
Health food.
Yep.
Night out or night at home?
Night at
Out
home.
at home.
Quality time or words of affirmation?
Quality time. It's weird.
Well,
Burgers or burgers or tacos?
Hamburgers.
Burgers.
Cold weather or warm weather?
Warm.
By plane or by car?
Plane.
Car.
Oh.
Wow, you were beginning to make me a little worried because I don't know that I've ever had a couple get all of them in complete agreement. So at least that last one was a little bit different. But that just gives you a picture of your relationship. So you and Tabitha are pretty aligned on most things, Jim. That's pretty good.
We're the same person.
Years of practice.
So everybody wants to know when they meet a couple, how'd you meet? What's your love story? So I want to hear, and this is going to be fun because I'm going to see if you guys agree on this. But how did you meet? How'd you fall in love? Tell us a little bit your story.
Okay. I will give my version that has as many details as I can recall, but the accuracy will be backed up by Tab. So we actually met in South Korea. We were both stationed there.
It was our first duty station.
Mm-hmm. And I had to do KP duty, which means you just work in the kitchen.
I was a cook for the Army at the time. It was my first job in the Army. I was a cook.
Yeah. And so I was at the short order, and I just heard, a voice talking about politics. And, I was a political science major, and I look over, and, there it was, love at first sight, right? At a Army chow line. And through, I'd say, kind of, I don't know, a bit of a folly where we didn't really kind of admit to each other, I guess, that we were in love, or really like interested in each other. I didn't get up the nerve to really tell Tab until a month before I was leaving.
He left.
Yeah, and it was just but I'm glad I did, because here we are, 15 years later.
Yeah, that's basically, I mean, we had mutual friends. We spent a lot of time together. There was a moment when I had my own room. I don't know if Jim had a roommate or not. He moved barracks multiple times, but I had my own room. And so I had a bunch of people over. We were getting ready to go out for the night, and we're listening to music, and we were eating pizza or something. And we just started having this conversation, and whatever music was playing and the things that I had in my room, Jim just kind of connected to, and he started asking me questions. Everybody in the room just kind of looked at us, looked at each other, and they were like, "Do you want us to leave?" And we were like, "No," because we didn't realize that we really felt the same way about each other.
Yeah.
Plus, he was getting ready to leave, and it just kind of complicated everything. But I mean, we went for it anyway. And we knew that we were going to be long distance for a while.
Yeah.
Jim, I need the rest of the story because you're leaving. So what happened after that? How did you propose? When did you guys get married?
I did the dumbest thing possible. And I was like, well, I'm in this new place. And so the short of it, right, is that we broke up.
He broke up with me.
I own it. That was me.
It wasn't just that he broke up with me, because we were separated he left Korea about 5 months before I was supposed to leave Korea.
Yeah.
I'm already I've got orders, and I'm trying to come to inevitably Clarksville again, Fort Campbell. I'm trying to come to Fort Campbell so that we can be in the same place. I volunteered to go to a deploying unit that's going to deploy for 15 months just so that I can be at the same duty station as this guy. And then he broke up with me 1 month before I was supposed to get there.
Realizing the folly of my ways, we then had a lovely dinner at a Chinese buffet.
Chinese buffet.
And the seat kept moving because the person behind me was very fidgety. But anyway,
Details matter.
we went back. Yeah, we gave it another go and realized, hey,
I gave him another chance.
Yes.
Thank you, Tabitha. So, Jim, how did you propose to Tab?
Oh man,
Another story.
my favorite story. Okay, so I had bought the ring. Timeline, I couldn't tell you the months or what the timeline was, but it was before my birthday. So I was on the fence. Did I want to do the proposal at Christmas? Did I want to do it New Year's or any of the other kind of cliche times? And leading up to that, I had stored the ring in a bag, in like one of my deployment bags in the closet. And so someone got curious and started rummaging around and found it, but then didn't tell me till later. No, she told me that she did. And I said, oh, that's it. That's the last time you'll see that ring, joking, of course. And so my birthday was coming up and we went, I think that picture right there. So we went to the General Jackson. It's one of those river boats that leave out of Nashville. And so I had it in my pocket and I was super nervous. And figured I was going to surprise her because she wouldn't know that, hey, just so short after I told her, oh, you're going to have to wait. So it was great. We go on the boat and it was a great time. And there was a Chinese acrobat show that absolutely captivated Tab's attention. So I was like, man, my plan was you have the backdrop of Nashville because that's where it was going. They're taking the Cumberland right by there, downtown Nashville. And so I was looking out the window. Okay, it's about that time. So, I'm really not feeling well. Can we go outside? And can you just come with me outside and just maybe some fresh air will help? And she's like, no, this is awesome. She's like, just go outside. You'll be fine. And so I kind of let it ride. And then I tried to hype it up a little bit more. Like, man, I'm really not doing great. Will you please come outside? I'll be right out after the show ends. All right. So show ends. I'm still outside. And then, Tab finally comes outside. And that's where I proposed, right next to like a storm drain that was feeding into the river. But we always laugh about that.
I said yes.
She did. Damn, look at that.
And then how long was it before you guys got married?
Legally?
That was
So we got engaged November 2nd, and then the army, the military kind of makes you do things that are rushed, and so we felt like we needed to hurry up and make it legal. You make more money that way. So we got married a month later on December 1st, legally in the courthouse of Clarksville, Tennessee. But we had a wedding in April. So our 15-year anniversary just passed. So December 1st, 2023 was our 15-year anniversary. But we won't have our marriage's quinceañera until April.
Yeah. So military families, a lot of people don't even, like, if you don't have somebody in your family or haven't spent time around military families, there's oftentimes a big disconnect or a misunderstanding, because I think culturally there is a unique culture to those who are serving our country and those who are not. And one of those is marriage. I hear all the time of same scenarios where somebody's getting married, then they actually have their wedding at a different time. You guys probably know multiple friends that are that way, that their wedding was, they got legally married, but the wedding happened at a different time, or they got married and then completely went different directions with deployments or duty stations, and how that works with depending on timing and everything. Can you guys speak to a little bit of those challenges when you do want to get married in the military and what that looks like? I mean, Tabitha, you shared that, here's Jim leaving, and what's that you're trying to get to Clarksville, and then what does that look like to get to a place where you're not married to that person, so really you have no legal right to get there? Talk a little bit about that and some of the challenges and stories you've heard.
Oh man, stories that we've heard. We've heard plenty of times. There's definitely some abuse in the system
Yeah.
where people. I mean, when I was still in. I know that I had a soldier that was married to his wife, even though they lived totally separate lives. Like sometimes, you do try to game the system where you get married and you're both collecting your housing allowance, and you get extra benefits. Like you get paid more money essentially for being married, and you get, I don't know, more rights in a way.
Yeah.
Especially if you're lower ranking, so you get to actually live off post and things like that. So there's a little bit more leeway. So we've seen people that actually abuse the system in a way in that regard, but there are people that really just kind of feel like they need to hurry up and rush their wedding. We had some friends in Hawaii that got married, I don't know, within a month of knowing each other. And she's Brazilian, so she actually needed to hurry up and get married because otherwise she was going to have to go back home, things like that. So especially when you're overseas, you see a lot more of that happen, especially in Korea. So there's a lot of interesting things that happen in Korea, as far as a wife for a year, a queen for a year, sometimes is what they call it. But I mean, back in our day, it's been a long time. I don't know what they do in Korea these days. But there are a lot of different things. So as far as that goes, yeah. But for us, when it just kind of worked out the way that it was supposed to, that he was already in Clarksville. He was already at Fort Campbell, and there happened to be a vacancy for me and for my job there. But the trade-off was supposed to be that I was going to a deploying unit. Fortunately, when you go from an overseas assignment, you get what they call dwell time, that you can't be deployed for at least 6 months. So we knew we were going to at least have 6 months in the same place at the same time for however long. I ended up they wanted to keep me back, and I didn't end up going on that deployment at all, which is fortunate because obviously we got married and the rest is history with that. But there's some interesting things that happen in the Army as far as marriage goes, but we really know our story better than anyone else's.
And what have been your different duty stations?
Oh, man. Let's see. Fort Campbell. We went to Fort Huachuca for training.
That's in Arizona.
Went to Hawaii, Georgia, so Fort Moore, most recently, and now we're at Hunter Army Airfield. We're headed back to Fort Campbell, so we're probably an anomaly as it pertains to like your typical married couple. We've kind of been blessed to be relatively stable in our duty station. So we were at Fort Campbell for 6 years. Fort Huachuca was quick, but that's just because you had to move there for the training.
It was a training cycle that we were going through.
And then 4 years in
Jim
Hawaii.
went back to Korea too. So while I was in Arizona and Hawaii, Jim was back in Korea for a year, and then we met back up in Hawaii. So I think we did some math, and for the first 6 years of our marriage, we had probably spent a sum total of about 12 months together in the same place at the same time.
Yeah.
Because I did a full year deployment and Jim did multiple shorter deployments. and so or in different trainings and things like that. So we hadn't, for the first 6 years of our marriage, we were very
50 first dates.
yeah, that's what we talk about.
So
That's how we
how do
describe
you
it.
make marriage work when you have, because most people think, oh, you get married and you spend all this time together and your goals and your vision and what you're doing aligns, and you guys, how do you do that and keep that unity, continue to build into your marriage when one person's here and one person's there, often with a very different time zone, with very different activity schedule? What are some of the things that you guys learned to really kindle the fire and build that relationship that you guys had started?
Yeah, I think this would be from my perspective, because I went on more frequent trips, but it was interesting. So I'll get to that in a second. But it was interesting when Tab deployed, and I was back home, but then I ended up deploying at the same time. It was interesting being the one back home for the first time, and really kind of seeing things from the perspective of the person who is stateside, who does normal life stuff, and that difference of how things feel on this side versus being on the deployed side. But I would say, like, overarchingly from a deployed perspective or being separated, it really forced intentionality, at least on the communication side, right? Where you have to identify every time I go on a trip somewhere, wherever it is in the world, right? We figure out where that rhythm is, where, okay, well, hey, if I know I'm going to be on duty from X time to Y, then how does that line up with the time zone of where Tab is? So either, do you connect before you go to work? Do you connect after work? Do you, set your alarm for the middle of the night, whatever the case may be? But it really is that intentionality that is helpful, because one, it sets a rhythm to just make sure that you can connect on those times. Back in the earlier days of the deployment, I gotta tip my hat to Tab, because it's not like it was in recent years. Now, obviously, deployments are a lot less frequent or fewer, but it was a shoddy sat phone call.
Technology is a lot better now.
Certainly no Wi-Fi or anything like that.
We didn't video, we didn't FaceTime, nothing like that. It was just like a garbled message, and sometimes you'd just be in the middle of a phone call and then it'd drop and you'd be like, well, don't know if I'll hear from you again tonight. You'd be like in the middle of a conversation trying to figure something out, and it'd be challenging, but definitely makes you more intentional. There'd be, on the notes app on my phone, I'd always keep a running list of things that I knew I needed to bring up to him, and things that we needed to talk about, like, oh, we need to pay whatever bills, like what or how are we going to pay that, things like that. So, the life continues on when you're back at home, so you have to figure out how you're doing things, like how you're going to buy things, what household items you might need, or if something breaks down. Inevitably, something always breaks, something always goes wrong when your spouse is deployed. I can name almost everything that went wrong during one of Jim's trips, and not just a deployment, but sometimes he'd have to go away for training for multiple months. When he went to Ranger School, you have no contact at all except for letters, and those letters are really funny because like half the time he's falling asleep in the middle of the letter, things like that. So
they're some of the best letters I've ever written.
Yeah.
In my head, when I actually put pen to paper, I'm sure they were just nonsense.
But really just trying to, like Jim said, the intentionality of knowing what you're going to talk about and anticipating if you're going to call. And Jim was always really good about making sure, establishing kind of a schedule with me and letting me know, hey, my shift is going to change, so expect that I might not be able to talk to you for a couple of days while I try to reset and things like that. So he's always very good about contacting me in those conversations.
Tabitha, I know you are no longer in the Army. How long have you been out, and what has that been like to step out of the military and then have your spouse still staying in it? Is that hard for you at times, knowing a lot of the ins and outs of how the military works, and or is it easier because you understand it?
It's definitely easier because I have that inside track. Still speak that same language, but I've been out for 6 years, I think. Maybe it's almost 7.
Yeah.
So it's been a long time. Doesn't feel like it's been a long time, but feels like yesterday. But I think that it helps. Jim knows after I was a cook, me and Jim had the same job, more or less. After I became an officer, we basically had the same job, so we spoke even more of the same language, and that was always really beneficial. The other button. So it's definitely a benefit to still have that. There are times when I really want Jim to talk to me about certain things and he can't, or sometimes he'll say something about an individual at work and I'll be like, let me get on the phone with this individual. Like, I can do this better. Let me give them some kind of insight, but it never goes like that. We just have conversations, and I feel like I'm able to be more of a springboard for inspiration or venting, things like that. So it's definitely beneficial that I once spoke the same language, but a lot of things have changed too since I've been out.
Yeah, Tabitha, you mentioned wanting to go talk to somebody that he works with, and I remember that when my wife was serving, and I think that's one of the dynamics that a lot of people don't understand if you're not in the military, about how really the Army is in control of every aspect of your life and even the family dynamics. A lot of people think, oh, you just kind of show up for work, but the military is actively involved in every aspect of your life, and if there's problems in your family, then the military is involved with what's going on in your family. And that's a very different perspective than people who are just civilians.
Yes, for sure.
So, of those duty stations you've been to, which was your favorite? And maybe not necessarily, but that experience, and then which one was the hardest?
Fort Moore was our favorite assignment. I was already out, but obviously we loved being there. You know, we met some of our best friends there, to include Nate and Liz Dewberry. But we got plugged into the church, and we had the best community ever. And that was the best part about it, was the people. We had great people in Hawaii too. We loved Hawaii. Obviously, it's paradise. But we were also really ready to come back to the mainland, and things about Fort Moore were exciting because we're close to Atlanta. I've been a Falcons fan my whole life. We were able to be season ticket holders for the first time ever, and that was really great and exciting. Until they lose every home game, but that was really great. We loved being there.
I think the hardest one is actually the one that where we are now, and it really is. It's lacking all the things that Tab talked about that we had at Fort Moore, right? We had an excellent church community. We had a tight knit friend group, a support group. Because we went through a lot of highs and a lot of lows, and all those folks were there through all of it, and we just haven't. We had obviously with our daughter being born, life made big changes, and so we didn't really get out as much and really kind of plug into those social networks and have those support networks around us. And I think there was just something about being in the Columbus area that really helped us feel home. And you'll know when you go to different places what's home and what's not. And so from was it unbearable? No, but you kind of look back and you say, well, things were great at in Columbus, and maybe just a different fit for different folks, and Savannah wasn't it for us.
Yeah. And Jim, where are you originally from?
So I am from northern suburbs of Chicago, and we had
went to college where?
I went to the University of Iowa.
And Tabitha, where are you from? Where did you go to school?
I'm originally from New Mexico, and I went to college twice. The first time I went to Oral Roberts University, and then I just graduated from Auburn
War Eagle.
last year. War Eagle.
Well, you guys, Jim, you mentioned some of the challenges you faced, and I think one of the things that a lot of people forget about with military is life still happens when you're gone, and people forget like what those challenges are like. So if you guys would, I'd love to speak as much as you're comfortable with. Tabitha and Jim, I know you've gone through miscarriage and dealing with that difficulty and not being able to have a child, and then now having a absolutely beautiful little girl. So talk a little bit about that journey and how that brought you closer together and how you navigated that challenge, because it was something that both of you faced and you had to navigate your own way of coping with it.
Yeah. So that in its own right was hard for obvious reasons, but it was almost crushing, I would say, because when it happened, I was on the other side of the world, and
When it happened the first time.
when it happened the first time, I was on the other side of the world, and COVID happened, and there were no planes. I could not get a plane out of where I was. There was no way, military or commercial, to fly home. Um, that was just brutal. I don't know how else to put it. And I can only imagine from Tab's perspective. But I think the only thing that really kept me going, because every day became is the airport open question daily. And the only thing that really kept me going through that was really the faith that God was surrounding Tab with people to care for her, to be with her. And so I think, again, that speaks to how much value and how much we embraced Columbus as our home, because those people rallied around Tab when I was on the other side of the world.
So yeah, I mean that obviously that was really hard. My mom came to be with me, and then my mom kind of couldn't leave because of COVID. So it was just kind of like the world stopped for several months, because I found out I was pregnant right before Christmas in December, and then I had the miscarriage in February, and then Jim didn't come home till July.
Yeah.
So it was a lot of different things that we had to go through, that loss and that grief we had to mourn separately.
Yeah.
And the way that we had to do it, the different things that we tried to learn, different ways that we needed to lean on each other, was there's just a lot of things that we tried to do to cope with that. But the community obviously was rock solid for me. I had a lot of support, and that was really good. There were, 2 subsequent losses that we had in September, and we kind of went through that it felt like it was very quick. The community and the support that I had in the beginning didn't feel like it was really there, because I don't know, you go through those kind of things, and when it happens again, you just kind of feel like people are looking at you in a way that you're already seasoned, you already have an understanding of how to get through this. You will. And then we had a third one, and it was interesting. I don't remember if it was I think it was the third one, but we were really stressed out. We had already started going through the adoption process for our daughter. Well, not for her specifically, because we were still on wait lists, but we'd already started our adoption process at the time. So it was very surprising when we found out that we were pregnant. Obviously very nerve-wracking, because I didn't want to have to go through the disappointment again. I was terrified. I was very crippled with fear that entire pregnancy. And my mom came out for all three of them, and she was very good and supportive, and she was helpful around the house. But as soon as my mom came, Jim went back to work. And so in a way, and we've talked about this, but in a way it felt like Jim was giving responsibility of me and my emotions over to my mom, and he just went back to work, and he didn't have to feel the same things. It's going through a pregnancy loss is not just an emotional thing. It's very physically taxing, and the changes that your body goes through, and the physical pain and debilitation is very difficult. And then he was just gone. And so that third one, it felt like we hadn't really been able to get through it together until later. So that was a challenge, because it seemed like Jim wanted to distract himself with work, which was great, but I didn't have anywhere to go. I had to go, I think, back to school, and I had a really crummy professor at the time that didn't really want to deal with me. So it was hard. The third one was hard. They were all hard, but they were all hard in their own right. And then going through the actual adoption journey to where we finally got Daisy, you have to do a totally separate adoption family podcast for us to go through how crazy those things were. But the military gives you a little bit of money to be able to do that. If you're going through fertility issues, they do support you, and they do pay for a lot of your medical issues. We didn't do anything like that through the military, but they were everywhere that Jim has been very understanding of all of the things that we've gone through, from our losses to our adoption process and just parenthood in general. Because sometimes one of us will need to do something and he'll need to go to work late or something like that. And I always, man, when I was a boss in the Army, I always wished that I had kids so that I could use them as a scapegoat for anything. Because I know so many people that would be like, oh, I can't come to work today, or I have to leave early because I have to take my kid to the doctor, or things like that. And I never had that opportunity while I was in the military, so I didn't get to use my child as a scapegoat. And I try to make Jim use our daughter as a scapegoat all the time, but he doesn't, because he's honest.
Well, how old's your daughter now, Jim?
20 months. We're really bad at the months thing.
Hey, I
We need to get
understand.
better at that.
Once you get past a year, it's like, they're a year and something.
Yeah. Not quite 2, but more than 1.
So
Almost
what have you learned stepping into fatherhood, Jim? I know you have a very soft spot for that little girl. So what's been some of your things that you've learned about yourself, and just the joy of having a daughter?
Oh man. First, it just absolutely your whole world, your priorities, everything shifts. It is. I've always had this terrible ability to strike a work-life balance, and I think what Tabitha talked about was certainly a testament to that. But with having Daisy now, everything's a lot more clear, I think, is the easiest way I can put it. And that's really been the biggest thing, right? So if we need to get her to the doctor, or if we need to do whatever the things are that it is. And I think also too, fortunately, I'm kind of at the stage in my career where there's a little more latitude. And that's all kind of aligned to where I'm able to really just I don't know, maybe strike that balance. I think that's always something that I'm gonna have to work at, and that's just how I'm wired. I mean,
Yeah.
I can own that. Um,
I think it's always a challenge for men. Not just because we can pour ourselves into our work, probably in a different way than women can. Not that they can't do the same thing, but I think there is something in guys that we can check into our work and just check out of everything else.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think it's, it's one of those things where, when you are at a point where you're really hitting your stride professionally, you're like, well, okay, this aspect of my life is actually kind of easy because you do have those skills, you have the background and the expertise to kind of perform well and do whatever it is that you do well. But now it's been really exciting because I'm absolutely humbled by a sweet little girl where it's like, man, I don't know how to do that. I better learn. And, changing diapers or we haven't quite gotten to styling her hair, but that will humble me quickly. Um, but yeah, it's just all the little things where you're like, okay, well, this is a new realm to step up and really put your effort into it.
Tabitha, what's your favorite thing you watch Jim do with your daughter? Or something that he expresses that you've just been like really has encouraged you or made you even more in love with Jim and watching him with Daisy?
It's very easy for Jim to leave work out. I'm not saying that he wasn't willing to do it before, but
Yeah.
he I think he recognizes the need for it because right now I'm not working, so I'm here with her all day and I love being home with her. She's the coolest person in the world, but sometimes she's overwhelming.
She's a little girl.
And
Yeah.
and Jim
Taught
is very good. She definitely tests my patience on a daily basis, but Jim is very good about stopping for the day, finding that balance and being able to cut things off and come and rescue me from being a crazy person going stir crazy or anything like that. So it's very it's a very different kind of person because he's very much, if you know Jim, you know that he puts all of his effort into everything that he does, and work is has always been that. So he's always been the best that he can be at anything when he works. He just he takes his work very seriously, even though I'm constantly telling him, you're an old crusty warrant officer. You don't have to work so hard. You're expected to slack off a little bit, but there's no slacky bone in this man's body. So it's impossible for him to really push back and not do that. And now that Daisy's in the picture, it seems to be a little bit different. So he's a lot more willing to do those things. But I just think that he's really fun. I know Daisy has a lot of fun with him. She's always laughing, and I just think that that's really cool. I love watching them together. So I just like she's just really fun to be around, but I know that Jim's a really fun dad. So when when it's his turn to have daddy daughter time, then I can go and do something else. And I love that. I think he's the best dad. He's definitely the best dad for Daisy. So
That's awesome. Jim, what have you enjoyed as Tabitha stepped into motherhood? What has you just been like, wow, this is amazing to watch?
Yeah, we were married, math, 13 and some change year, right? So you're married to this person for over a decade, and to see this new side of someone emerge is just it's a beautiful thing. That when I see Tab and Daisy together, man, I can't get my phone out fast enough to snap a picture because it's just seeing them connect, and just experience life and have, aha moments, or even just, little funny moments, is just, it's been absolutely magical to watch, to be a part of. And it's one of those where I think deep down you knew it was always in someone, but you could never really visualize it until it was real, until it was
Yeah.
in front of your face. And it's just been absolutely magical. I I just I try to remind Tab that she's very hard on herself, as it comes to being a mom, and she is awesome. And the strides she goes to, with Daisy is superhero level. It's just awesome. Um, but I think, to kind of put a bow on it is, having someone that you've been with for so long, reveal another side to them has really just been, incredible to watch and be around.
So you guys have been married how many years again?
15.
15 years of marriage. What advice would you give somebody to have a successful marriage, to endure for the long haul, to grow in their marriage? What would you say?
So, specifically for the military side, right? Because I think a lot of, so I'll speak from the husband side.
Yeah.
Obviously, there's certainly a magnetism, right, that can happen at the workplace, to where, the job that you're doing is very important, and the mission that you're serving is very important. And that can draw you in, that can draw in a lot of your attention, your energy, your focus. And so I have started to tell, especially because I'm getting close to retirement, I have told a lot of my younger soldiers, and even, not the younger soldiers, hey, I use it as the retirement visualization, right? So take yourself to your retirement ceremony and start thinking about who's going to actually be there. Think about, the faces in the crowd, and who is required to be there because it's, out of a courtesy, and then who's going to be there because they've been with you every step of the way, they loved you and supported you. And if you have doubts of who is going to be in that crowd, that's when you take a hard stop, and really start, I would argue, reprioritizing if it's not your family. Because I'll be honest, I've been around the military long enough and been through enough retirement ceremonies where, if they were good friends of mine, yeah, absolutely, we'll stay in touch, because we have that relationship beyond the military. But your boss, he'll be there for that day, maybe, if your boss is still in that organization. And then you are a name that probably disappears, to be honest. So, I just look at, I always offer the recommendation that, hey, as you go through your life in the military, what you do in service to this country is important. There's no doubt about that. But, you have to make sure that it's not coming at a sacrifice of the ones that you love.
Great reminder, Jim. Tabitha?
I think that it's important for wives, especially, regardless of military or not, to make sure that how you let your husband know how important they are to be in the household, and how important their presence is in the house, but also making sure that you're letting them know that you recognize how significant they are in their workplace too. I know that the work that Jim does, again, is impeccable. He does great work. He does really well. Everybody that's ever worked with Jim has only had great things to say about him. I know he's a superstar in the workplace. I make sure to remind him that I know he's a superstar in the workplace. So it's important to acknowledge their significance in both places, but always reminding them that this is the most significant. This is where your legacy is going to be made, is in the household, is in your marriage, is in the message that we can spread through our marriage, how we can impact other people through our story, through our lives, through our family. That's your real legacy. So that's important, but always reminding them that this is their best place, and reminding each other all the time that you're on the same team.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's always going to be number one, because you're going to always change duty stations, but your person is going to be there as long as you have a good marriage. Sometimes you can leave them at your former duty station, and that's cool too. I guess some people do that. We're not doing that, but
So true, so true. I think the the way that the woman as spouse can encourage her husband into seeing those roles is so crucial, and it's vital that they feel important in both spaces, and they feel needed, and that they add value in both spaces. So thank you for sharing that. Thank you guys so much for being on the show today. We could talk probably for another couple of hours just because we hadn't been able to catch up lately. So we have already gone about 45 minutes, which is longer than I had expected for us to talk. So thank you guys so much for sharing your story, sharing some advice and some wisdom, and also sharing your own difficulty, but then the blessing and the faithfulness of God in bringing Daisy into your life. And she's amazing. And you guys are crushing parenthood, and so excited for this next season you guys have ahead. And Jim, thank you for serving our country. Thank you for what you've done, and Tabitha as well, for your sacrifice and all that you guys have done to protect our nation, but also to put a model out there for what a marriage should look like. You guys, everybody that knows you loves you, and definitely respects you and respects your marriage. So thank you guys so much.
thanks for having us. We love you.
Love you guys.